Lo que usted firma aquí no puede ser divulgado sin consecuencias legales, incluso para el banco. What you sign here cannot be disclosed without legal consequences, even for the bank. Leona Baker murmured in Spanish, a discreet earpiece tucked into her ear. Her eyes locked on a smudge by the reception counter. Her tone was even sharp like a courtroom statement, not a janitor's whisper. On the other end of the call was a professor from the University of Salamanca, asking Leona to verify a leaked agreement tied to an ongoing legal dispute from the Miami branch. She'd first seen the draft tossed in a legal bin 2 weeks ago. Now it was the center of a corporate investigation. Leona, a 30-year-old black woman in a wrinkled Navy custodial uniform and gray head wrap, barely 5'3", moved like a ghost among pressed suits and polished heels, but her voice in crisp Castilian Spanish cut through marble and silence and slipped through soundproof glass. Behind that glass, on the mezzanine, two senior managers of the bank stood frozen, Vanessa from external relations and Grant from operations. They had just exited an early briefing when they caught her voice. Vanessa's jaw tightened. Grant's brow furrowed. They didn't catch the full conversation. They didn't need to. One sentence legal repercussions from a janitor was enough to disturb the hierarchy. A minute later, the internal announcement system beeped. Loud and clear, Leona Baker, operations office. Immediately, no one turned, but the lobby held its breath. Leona rose slowly. The cloth still in her hand tightened. Her back remained straight. Her chin lifted. She walked past the reception desk where intern Ava had just finished a selfie, toward the service elevator, her expression unreadable, but her eyes made someone step aside without a word. Some stories start with silence. Hers began when someone finally listened and couldn't ignore her anymore. And here at Unveiled Wealth, we make sure voices like hers are never forgotten. The elevator doors slammed shut. Leona hit the O. Pierre, Nisfering, Pening, Esser, Winnersuri, button. Her hand didn't shake, but her breath stalled mid-chest. A janitor's badge hung at her chest. Baker, but the voice on the intercom hadn't called a cleaner. They called someone they noticed. The elevator jerked upward. She stared straight ahead, not at her reflection, not at the blinking light, just the steel door. This ride was short 40 seconds, maybe less, but it stretched like a corridor of doubt. She'd taken thousands of elevators in this bank, always with a mop or trash bag. Today, she held only a damp cloth and a truth someone tried to bury. Ding! She stepped out onto the operations floor, a corridor lined with closed doors and curated silence. Leona stepped into a corridor lined with closed doors and curated silence. Synthetically polished air. It didn't smell like bleach. It smelled like denial. Grant was waiting, arms folded. Behind him, a junior manager fiddled with a digital pad. Grant didn't offer a seat. He simply gestured, a curt flick of the hand. Care to explain what you were doing just now in the lobby? Leona stayed standing. A personal call. In Spanish with legal implications. I answered a question. That's all. From the janitorial staff. During client hours, he tilted his head, voice sharp. She said nothing. Her silence, deliberate. Grant took a step closer. This isn't a call center. You embarrass the institution. Starting today, you're reassigned Sanitation Corridor 3C, near the disposal chutes. 60 days. No appeals. Leona didn't move, didn't blink. That will be all. She turned without a word, walked steadily to the elevator, not retreating, just choosing where to carry her dignity next. As the doors slid shut behind her, her hands remained calm. But deep beneath the surface, something shifted. The silence they'd built to contain her had started to fracture. The stairwell to Sanitation Corridor 3C was narrow and unmarked, the kind of place most employees didn't know existed. Leona stepped into the low-ceilinged hall, light flickering overhead, past a rusted pipe hissing in intervals. The air reeked of mildew and disinfectant. No corporate lavender here. This was where the forgotten jobs were done. This was where they'd sent her. The locker at the end of the corridor bore her name, scrawled in fading Sharpie on tape. Inside, she found a new set of gloves, heavy-duty bleach, and a laminated rotation chart. Her name had been highlighted in red twice. 30 minutes in, she'd already scrubbed down 2 men's rooms and was halfway through mopping an overflow near the chute bins when a junior associate walked by, pausing at the door. Hey, he said, half curious, half mocking. You're that lady from the lobby, the Spanish call thing. Leona didn't stop mopping. Excuse me. He smirked. Everyone saw the clip. You sounded like some UN translator or something. How many languages do you even speak? Enough, she said without looking up. He laughed and walked off, murmuring something she didn't catch. But she knew the tone. It wasn't curiosity. It was containment. Back in the staff cafeteria, two women from HR were gossiping over soup. I mean, if she's so smart, why is she down there with the bleach? Because credentials don't mean culture fit, the other said, too loud to be accidental. Leona walked past them with her lunch tray, her uniform damp at the cuffs. Her seat was always near the rear vending machines, the table no one chose unless everything else was full. That afternoon, she found a fresh stack of bin liner packets dumped in front of her supply closet, blocking the door. No, it's turned to simmer them on. No explanation. Just an unspoken message, stay in your place. She stepped over them and kept walking. It was after hours, or when most departments had thinned out, and only the cleaning crew moved between shadows. Leona was wiping down the glass outside conference room 7B when she spotted it. A briefing packet, left on the inside ledge. Through the tinted panel, she could read the header client strategy, Hispanic outreach. Below it, a full page in Spanish, her brow furrowed. The grammar was stiff, the tone robotic. She unlocked the door with her maintenance pass, stepped in, and skimmed the document. Whoever wrote this had clearly run it through software twice. Several terms were mistranslated. Idioms were rendered literally, even comically. Leona reached into her apron for a pen and began correcting directly on the printout. She didn't expect thanks. She didn't even expect it to be noticed. But she couldn't walk away from a bad translation, not when it bore the bank's name. The next morning, that same document appeared laminated on the internal bulletin board with a gold star sticker. Ava, the intern from reception, was posing beside it. Great initiative, someone said as a manager clapped her on the back. Leona stood nearby, invisible. The corrected lines were hers down to the phrasing she'd borrowed from a bilingual legal seminar. Her handwriting had been copied, fonts adjusted, content repackaged. No one asked who had made the edits. Later that week, the bank's internal newsletter featured a short paragraph. Shout out to Ava and Mim for taking linguistic initiative with our Spanish outreach materials. Leona's hands tightened around the mop handle as she read it by the custodial clock-in wall. The following night, she returned to the same room. The board now bore a printed quote in calligraphy font. Language is the bridge to trust. Her own words, Basur, spoken in a training module no one credited her for. She turned off the lights and left. Her shadow lingered longer than she did. It started with whispers in the hallway. Did you see the clip? The janitor, yeah, unreal, thought she was a UN rep or something. By Thursday, it wasn't just whispers. Someone had found the security footage muted, grainy but clear enough. It showed Leona, crouched by the front lobby, speaking in Spanish. A few seconds looped and subtitled Lo que usted firma, followed by dramatic music. The video was uploaded to the internal team chat labeled Friday Funnies. Leona discovered it during a bathroom break. The intern at the sink didn't even flinch when she realized Leona was behind her. Oh, hey, she said, drying her hands. You're kind of famous now. That afternoon, a mock certificate was taped to her supply closet. Janitor of Jargon. For services rendered in multilingual comedy. Printed in Comic Sans. She ripped it down without a word. Later, near the freight elevator, two junior bankers passed by. Careful, one said, grinning. Don't speak too loud. She might translate you into a scandal. They laughed to Mayura and Leona turned slowly. Didn't blink. Wouldn't need to, she said calmly. You're doing a great job yourself. That night, she stayed late to restock the disinfectant cart. In the back corner of the janitor's lounge, someone had pinned a cartoon of Mop wearing a headset, with the caption, Bilingual Hero Cleans Floors and Reputations. She stood in front of it, silent, the corners of her lips unmoved. Without a glance back, she walked out, leaving the cartoon untouched exactly where it belonged. Let them stare. She had stared down worse. Friday evening. The offices upstairs were dimming. Most of the floors had emptied. Leona had just finished wiping down the glass conference table in 6C when she noticed something off. A red folder, not on the table, on Ava's desk, left partially open. She'd passed by the intern station countless times. Ava was always careless, messy with sticky notes, earbuds always in. But this folder was different, neat, thick, clipped shut with a black binder. Leona's eyes caught the name scrawled in the corner label. Antonoir Grant. She paused, something catching in her breath. Grant Dewari Yurderananimwam. Same name as the operations manager who had demoted her without hesitation. The only Grant in this building. Ava returned from the pantry with a drink in hand. The moment she saw Leona near her desk, her steps hitched. "Hey," she said too brightly, too fast. "Forgot to log out. Gotta shut this down." She rushed past Leona, swept the folder into her tote, and pressed the monitor dark. Her face tried to stay neutral. It didn't succeed. Leona said nothing, just walked past, but her mind didn't. Later, in the sanitation supply room, she typed the name quietly into her old, cracked phone. No official staff listing, no department, no position. 21. Only one result appeared, a vendor invoice approved last quarter, labeled Translation Services, Natalie Grant. Leona stared at the screen. Her thumb hovered above the glass. She didn't know exactly who Natalie was, not yet. But she'd seen this kind of shadow before. A name with no record, a contract with no resume. It was all too familiar. Favor over merit. Connections handed down like office furniture. She tapped save. There would be more, but this was the beginning. Sometimes the truth doesn't shout, it waits, quiet and sharp, for the right ears to hear. And in that silence, something had started to stir. If you're still with us, stay close, because at Unveiled Wealth, the story's just getting started. Monday morning began with a summons. Leona was restocking the janitor's closet when her phone buzzed, unmarked number. "Mrs. Baker, this is administration. Please report to the 20th floor. CEO Clark would like a word." The 20th floor. No one from sanitation went to the 20th floor. Leona washed her hands at the basin, straightened the hem of her uniform, and walked to the executive elevator. She kept her eyes ahead as she stepped in beside two men in suits who barely acknowledged her presence. The doors opened to a corridor lined with glass offices. At the end, a receptionist waved her through. "She's waiting." Vanessa Clark stood by her desk, a thick manila folder in hand, framed by windows that poured soft light across the glass surface. She didn't smile, just nodded toward the door. Leona stepped in, closed it quietly behind her, and took the offered seat without a word. "I heard you speaking Spanish last week," Vanessa said, flipping the folder open. "Fluently. Castilla dialect, correct?" Leona nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Ni ma'am." Vanessa's eyes didn't leave the pages. "I've reviewed your file, or more precisely, what's missing from it." She dropped the folder on the desk with a soft thud, the papers inside shifting slightly. Then she looked up, her tone cool but probing. "Tell me, Mrs. Baker, what exactly are you doing cleaning floors in my bank?" Leona held her gaze, steady, surviving. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was measured. Vanessa let it stretch just long enough to mean something. "Then we're hosting a summit next week. Delegates from Madrid and Bogota. We've reviewed 5 firms for multilingual coordination. None are right." She tapped the folder. "But someone forwarded me a draft of our Spanish briefing, full of idiomatic clarity, real localization. Tracked edits came from your login." Leona said nothing, but in her mind, one detail echoed louder than the rest. The draft that reached Vanessa's desk wasn't part of any official channel. She had corrected it late one night and left it tucked behind the conference room monitor unsigned. Someone had picked it up. Someone had forwarded it. But not to HR, straight to the top. Vanessa continued. "You're being temporarily assigned to summit prep. You'll report only to me. You'll have access to the language materials. Keep it discreet, huerquito." "Yes, ma'am." Vanessa handed her a lanyard. "Temporary access, level 20. Before she left, Leona asked, "Why now?" Vanessa glanced at her. "Because talent doesn't whisper. It echoes a sornearendum, and last week it reached my floor." Leona stepped back into the corridor. Though her legs trembled slightly, her stride remained steady, deliberate. The temporary badge in her hand felt heavier than its plastic weight suggested. She didn't smile, not yet, but the air around her seemed different now, dense with something unspoken. The silence, once still, had begun to shift. Before Atlanta, before bleach and stainless steel, there was Florence. Leona had lived there for nearly 4 years. Her apartment had overlooked the Arno, the shutters warped with age, the air always carrying the faint scent of espresso and stone. She wasn't a janitor then. She was La Cometa the Comet, known for her precision and velocity and simultaneous interpretation. Booths at trade expos, bilateral negotiation, global textile summits, she worked them all. Her headset was her weapon, her voice an instrument. She switched between Italian, French, Mandarin, and English with ease, sometimes mid-sentence. She remembered the click of heels in marble corridors, the stillness of listening rooms. The moment a client gave the nod, the deal sealed because understanding had happened. She had made it happen. Once, at the Florence Trade Forum, a tense exchange between an Italian rep and a Chinese buyer nearly collapsed over a mistranslated idiom. Leona jumped in, reframed the phrase in Mandarin, and watched tension dissolve in real time. The deal closed at $12, $4 million. One de Suriname. That night, her name was passed around among diplomats. She'd been offered 3 contracts on the spot. She turned them down. Her father had collapsed the next morning, a hemorrhagic stroke. No warning, no goodbye. Leona was on a plane back to Atlanta within 48 hours. 2 suitcases. One mother with early onset arthritis, and a teenage brother who thought dinner would still be chicken nuggets. She'd planned to return, but the world she came home to had no patience for pauses. No one cared about forms, deals, idioms, or perfect diction. In Atlanta, she was just another applicant with non-U experience and no local references. She sent out 82 applications in 6 months. The rejection emails ranged from polite to indifferent. Thank you for your interest, but the position has been filled. While your background is impressive, we've decided to pursue other candidates. We regret to inform you. Each one printed, folded, and stacked behind her bedroom mirror. A quiet archive of being overlooked. Still, she kept translating. Every night, with TED Talks and European finance panels on borrowed Wi-Fi, she whispered legal phrases and cultural lingo into the dim glow of her laptop screen. Her voice never stopped moving, even when no one was listening. The janitor job had been meant as a stopgap, just until something opened. It had been 6 years. 6 years of bleaching gloves. 6 years of low eye contact and locked doors. Of watching interns get onboarded into roles she was overqualified for, while her requests for internal transfers were ignored or lost. The staff portal didn't reject her. It just disappeared her. 42 applications, 0 replies. Once, she asked HR directly. The response, stay in your lane. Meanwhile, Ava took FaceTime calls at the reception desk. Loud, banana one unchecked. Leona knew it wasn't about experience. It was about presence, about who fit the image and who didn't. Still, she translated. Quietly, contracts found in the trash, training guides with broken Spanish, even internal memos where the tone was off. No credit, no acknowledgement, just better communication for people who didn't know she existed. Her apartment had become a temple of persistence. Laminated certificates from Florence, interpreter licenses, one letter from the European Linguistics Network commending her thesis, and above all, taped to the fridge, keep your voice fluent. Someone will hear it. She hadn't written that. Her mother had. Each time Leona passed it, she whispered it back, just in case the walls were listening. Sometimes, late at night, she'd take her brother's old-school laptop to the kitchen counter and scroll through job listings with foreign language tags. She never stopped searching. Spanish analyst, Mandarin liaison, Ishwe interpreter, Atlanta. Most had the same requirements, local experience, clearance level, references she didn't have. One night, she found a listing for a bilingual operations coordinator at her own bank. She applied within minutes. The portal never sent a confirmation. A week later, she walked past the HR office and saw a printed resume on the desk. It wasn't hers. Different name, same job code. She said nothing, just went back to her floor buffer. She'd become fluent in denial, but her accent was rebellion. Every phrase she practiced, every term she corrected, it wasn't just defiance. It was preparation. Because one day, someone would ask the right question. And she intended to be ready when they did. The morning after the folder, Leona arrived early. She didn't sleep. Instead, she replayed every word Vanessa had said in the office. Every glance toward the documents with the initials NG. Her mother had tried to make tea, but Leona just paced. Her brother stirred once in his sleep, mumbled her name, and she kissed his forehead before stepping into the dawn. The bank's corridors felt colder that morning, not in temperature. In tension. She wore the same uniform, but something about her posture had changed. Not taller, just steadier, as if her spine had remembered it used to stand for something more than compliance. She checked in, collected her supplies, then walked straight to the freight elevator. No mop, just a clipboard. No gloves, Isirenon ones. Just questions. As the metal doors slid open, she stepped inside, alone. She pressed the button for level 20, the floor few had seen, and fewer returned from with answers. The ride was short, but it felt like a corridor between two worlds. When she stepped out, the lighting hit her differently. Everything was glass and silence. A receptionist nodded toward the door at the end. "She's expecting you." Vanessa didn't look up when Leona entered. Not at first. She was reviewing a document, flipping pages slowly. Leona closed the door gently behind her. Vanessa gestured toward the seat. "Sit, Leona did. "Oh, you saw something yesterday," Vanessa said without preamble. "Something that wasn't in your job description." Leona said nothing, just waited. "You documented it. You forwarded it to yourself." Vanessa tapped a screen. "I read every word." A pause. The kind that wasn't hesitation, just calibration. "That checklist you flagged Natalie Grant, she's not on any of our rosters. The ID on her vendor invoice is fabricated. The signature approval came from someone in operations." Leona's fingers curled slightly against her thighs. "Grant," Vanessa nodded. "It appears so." She leaned forward. "Tell me something, Leona. Do you think silence is safer than proof?" Leona held her gaze. "Not anymore." The corners of Vanessa's mouth lifted. Not a smile. Something closer to respect. "Good. Because I need someone who understands risk. Who doesn't just speak fluently, but sees clearly." She reached into a drawer and slid a folder across the desk. "You're going to lead the internal language audit team, temporarily. You'll report directly to me. The summit is 5 days away. Fix what needs fixing." Quietly, Leona opened the folder. Inside were documents from 7 departments, flagged in red and annotated poorly. Her heart beat faster, not with fear, but recognition. She closed the folder slowly. "I'll need a desk. You have one outside this office. Badge is at reception." Leona stood. Her pulse was steady. Her hands didn't tremble. As she reached the door, Vanessa's voice followed her. "Be careful. Not everyone wants you here." Leona turned her head slightly. "That's fine. I'm not here for them." She stepped into the hallway, the glass reflecting her from a dozen angles. For the first time, the silence around her didn't feel like exile. It felt like space being cleared. The red folder had no label, just a clipped corner and a coffee ring on its cover. But what it held made Leona's stomach tighten. She read through the Spanish version of the summit welcome packet first. It started formally enough, but by page 3, the tone shifted. A phrase meant to convey optimism had been rendered into a line that, loosely translated, warned of the wolf in the market gate. Her eyes narrowed. By page 5, the language turned almost sardonic, phrases that carried cultural baggage, references that, in Spain, would have been associated with colonial arrogance. She flipped to the Mandarin version, and it was worse. One idiom had been mistranslated to imply the bank saw its Chinese partners as superstitious opportunists. Another sentence, meant to highlight economic resilience, now sounded like a veiled insult about desperation. Her pulse quickened. She scanned to the bottom of the page. Looking for the translator ID, there it was. Printed in small, neat type, Natalie Grant. But it wasn't just poor translation. It was dangerous. Leona leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. If these materials went out to international delegates, they wouldn't just offend. They'd undermine everything the summit stood for: trust, collaboration, diplomacy. She turned to the contract index. Natalie's invoice $69,000 for full translation and localization services. No backup credentials. No language certifications. And most damning, no feedback trail. The bank had signed off without peer review. Leona opened her laptop as the clock struck 11:42 p.m. Outside, the skyline blinked soft orange. She pulled up her own language tools, reference dictionaries, and a bookmark glossary from the UN's translation service. Then she began rewriting, not just fixing mistakes, but dismantling and rebuilding each sentence until the meaning held firm, precise, and diplomatic. By 2:00 a.m., she had finished the Spanish version. It read like diplomacy again, fluid, respectful, precise. She moved on to Mandarin, where every character she typed felt like a thread being rewoven. She didn't stop to eat, barely paused to blink. By 4:27 a.m., the entire packet had been reconstructed. She saved it as Summit Recovery, Final L. Baker. Then she printed 3 copies, slid them into a blank red folder, and placed it outside Vanessa Clark's door. No note, no signature, only the truth. carefully translated and left waiting at the door. The folder sat silent but urgent. The clock was already ticking. The next morning, Leona arrived at the bank just before sunrise. The street still carried a trace of mist, and the air had the weight of something about to shift. She walked past the janitorial sign-in and headed straight to the service elevator. No mop today, just a purpose. As she stepped onto the 20th floor, the receptionist looked up, startled, then nodded. She's in. Vanessa Clark didn't say anything when Leona entered. She just held up the red folder. Did you write this? Leona stepped closer before replying, her voice calm. I fixed it. Vanessa opened to a bookmarked page. These are diplomatic registers, proper idioms, formality tones, even the formatting. You did this overnight. Leona nodded. Vanessa exhaled slowly and set the folder down. Do you know what would have happened if the originals went out? Yes, one nachachensu. A silence fell between them. Not discomfort calibration. Vanessa tapped the folder again. This saved us. That's not a small word. Just then, the door burst open. Mornin', Grant said, stepping in without knocking. Vanessa, I need to know why the Spanish and Mandarin versions were pulled from the summit packet. My niece spent weeks. They were unacceptable. Vanessa cut in. Her tone didn't rise, but it landed hard. And dangerous. Leona didn't flinch. Grant looked between them. She's not qualified to. No, Vanessa said, holding up a document. Natalie Grant is not certified in any language service. The ID she submitted was falsified, and the invoice she submitted under your vendor code. Grant paled. It was just a translation. It's not like, it represented this institution, Vanessa snapped. To foreign diplomats, ministers, investors. If that version had gone out, we'd be managing an international scandal. He took a step back. You can't possibly think. I'm launching an internal audit. Every vendor you've approved in the last 18 months will be reviewed. Grant opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came. Vanessa turned calmly to Leona. This was you. Leona nodded once. You'll coordinate translation oversight for the summit. Effective immediately. Report to me only. As Grant turned to leave, his face a mix of shock and fury, Vanessa added, security will walk you down. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Truth had already spoken. The boardroom was packed. Vanessa entered with purpose, flanked by two members of the compliance team. Behind her, Leona walked in silent, composed, carrying a folder marked confidential. The chatter died the moment they stepped inside. The air was dense with unease. A dozen executives turned in their chairs. At the head of the table, a board member cleared his throat but didn't speak. Vanessa took the floor. We're here to address a breach of professional protocol and fiduciary trust. Our institution's name was nearly attached to a document that would have insulted two diplomatic delegations. She nodded at Leona. Leona stepped forward and laid the folder on the polished table. The original translation contained numerous linguistic errors and cultural misrepresentations. I've marked the most damaging examples. She opened to a page with two highlighted paragraphs. This line implies financial desperation. This one references a proverb tied to exploitation narratives. Neither was intended, but both were printed. Murmurs rippled through the room. Vanessa didn't let the silence grow. The vendor responsible was Natalie Grant, hired under authorization from Mr. Grant. She didn't look at him. Her qualifications were falsified. No verification was conducted. All eyes turned to Grant. He began, but his voice cracked. We are terminating all contracts related to MIMAs. Grant effective immediately, Vanessa continued, and opening an audit on every vendor approved under Mr. Grant's supervision over the last 2 years. The room went still. Vanessa turned toward the security team. Effective immediately, Mr. Grant is dismissed. Escort him out. He stood slowly. The color had drained from his face. He looked around for support and found none. As he was let out, Leona remained still. She didn't need to move something far greater already had. A quiet shift, once unthinkable, now unmistakable. And she had sparked it without raising her voice. From the back of the room, a junior director murmured. She rewrote the whole packet overnight. Someone else answered, and saved our reputation. No one questioned it. The woman once seen only in passing now stood at the center of clarity. She was no longer the one with the mop. She was the one who noticed what everyone else missed. By mid-afternoon, the staff bulletin had updated. Director of International Communications, Leona Baker. Effective immediately. Some read it in stunned silence. Others in quiet celebration. In the break room where she used to wipe tables, A ripple of applause broke out. Not loud, oh, but sure. Leona stood just outside the HR suite, watching the names scroll across the digital display. Below her new title, the tagline read, "Oversees all multilingual operations. Reports directly to the executive office." Behind her, a few custodial staff exchanged glances. One whispering, "Is that really her?" Someone replied, "Damn right it is." Inside, Vanessa gestured to the table where a press kit was being assembled. "Your photo goes in here. New staff profiles go live by end of day." Leona picked up the welcome packet. Inside was a letter she'd translated just 3 nights ago, now approved and finalized under her own credentials. There was no joy on her face. Not yet, but her breath came slower, deeper. Her shoulders settled. This wasn't just a promotion, it was a long overdue correction. Vanessa leaned in. "Your team will come from internal applicants only. Unofficially, I want eyes on anyone with overlooked credentials." Leona didn't hesitate. Already started. She left the room not as a visitor, but as a vector. Her first day didn't arrive with fanfare. It arrived with intention measured, deliberate. She reviewed documents, requested personnel records, and sent a memo to the linguistics database suggesting protocol updates. At 4:17 p.m., she walked past the lobby. A receptionist looked up but didn't say a word. This time, Leona didn't expect her to. She walked past the desk, through the glass doors and into a space that once ignored her presence now. It echoed with her name. Leona stood at the center of the executive floor briefing room, the lights soft but focused, her presence no longer peripheral. She held a thin binder in her hand, contents clear, purpose undeniable. Behind her, a screen lit up with a title in clean, firm text, Operational Audit Phase 1. She looked at the room, half leadership, half observers. Some who had known her only as the woman with the mop, some who hadn't noticed her at all. Not anymore. This audit was not designed to shame departments. She began, voice steady, but to reveal patterns of omission. She clicked to the next slide. 17 contracts approved without proper linguistic verification. 4 linked to external vendors with no credentials on file. 2 with forged documentation. She let the silence stretch not to intimidate, but to let the truth settle. One of those contracts was signed under the same vendor code used for Natalie Grant. A rustle in the room. Not shock recognition. Leona nodded slowly. "We are canceling all open language service contracts flagged during this review, effective today. Internal review protocols are being rewritten. No vendor will be approved without cross-verification by at least 2 accredited specialists." She paused at the final slide, where the message stood unadorned, a white background, black text. Respect, precision, accountability. These words aren't aspirations. They're baselines. Search for my narcan with a broom. As she stepped away, Vanessa stood to speak, but the room didn't wait. Applause broke first from the back 2 custodial leads, still in uniform, their hands steady, deliberate. It rolled next from the finance table, then rose from compliance, a quiet tide gaining momentum. It wasn't thunderous, it was seismic, rippling outward not in noise, but in recognition. That evening, across every floor of First Colonial, quiet conversations sparked like static. "Did you hear she called it all out in front of everyone? Cleaned more than floors." "Huh?" Screens updated, profile pages refreshed. And under the bolded line for Director of International Communications, one name remained: Leona Baker. In the break room, a janitor placed his tray down slowly and stared at the message on the monitor. Then he nodded once, quietly proud. In HR, a recruiter pulled up an old application, Leona's original one, and stared at the no response line beside it. She hit delete. In the lobby, a new mural was unveiled. Painted in soft tones, it showed silhouettes rising not just through buildings, but through language itself, ascending in phrases written in 5 tongues. Below, a single line of serif gold read, "Every voice deserves to be heard in its own language." Vanessa passed it later, paused, then smiled faintly. Leona stood upstairs at her desk, reviewing updated compliance forms. A folded note sat beneath her keyboard. She opened it. It read, "My daughter saw your name on the screen today. She asked what a director does. I said, she listens." Ha ha, no signature. She folded the note again and tucked it into her notebook. Not as proof, as purpose. Downstairs, someone forwarded a screenshot of the internal memo to their cousin at the branch in Midtown. By the end of the hour, it had been shared 200 times. At another location, A receptionist quietly walked to the shredding bin and pulled out 3 old resumes marked overqualified and placed them on the director's desk. No one said a word, but everyone noticed. It moved through departments not as noise, but as clarity finally being seen. At 5:32 p.m., an intern who had once laughed when Leona passed by now stood silent in the elevator, eyes low. She pressed the lobby button without a word. Leona didn't acknowledge it because she didn't need to. That silence had already spoken volumes. Change doesn't always ask for permission. Sometimes it just walks in badge and title intact and gets to work. 1 month later, an internal memo circulated quietly across First Colonial. Initiative launch hidden potential. No banner, which you original term. No splash page, which was your one name on it. Just a call for internal applicants from facilities, food services, and logistics. Open roles in data entry, analysis, research, and communications positions historically filled externally, now made available from within. Leona had written every line herself. The rules were simple, no names on the first round. Only skills, certifications, and experience. Bias blind. Credential forward. By week's end, 327 applications had come in. Of those, 98 held college degrees, 34 had advanced certifications. One had served as a senior financial auditor in Bogota. Another had taught statistics in Morocco. A third was a military interpreter, fluent in 6 languages. None had been previously considered. Leona sat with each of them not across a desk, but beside them, at lunch tables and break rooms, in the hush of early mornings before shifts. She asked only one question: what have they missed about you? The answers came slowly at first, then flowed freely, painfully honest, and unmistakably powerful. My degree's in applied math. I just needed benefits. I was a teacher for 12 years. I stopped applying after no one called back. I translate for my parents every time they visit the bank. But no one ever asked if I speak the language. They just assumed I clean. Leona wrote everything down, not as notes, but as blueprints, designs for what had been ignored too long. By the end of the quarter, the results were impossible to ignore. 12 candidates from hidden potential had been promoted into entry-level analyst roles. 3 joined the regulatory research team. The former military interpreter, was asked to consult on the upcoming regional compliance report. In the cafeteria, a new display board was mounted beside the staff clock-in wall. It read credentials without title, listing anonymized bios of internal hires who had transitioned roles. The response submissions flooded in. Leona launched a mentoring initiative, pairing every new internal hire with someone 2 steps above their role. She called it Language in Motion. Each week, mentees shared stories, not just of success, but of survival. Persistence. Dignity. And then came the letter. This time, it bore the seal of the University of Salamanca. She read it twice, her eyes steady, then finally let herself smile. It was an offer not just a fellowship, but a chair. Department of Applied Cultural Linguistics. Guest professorship. Vanessa found her in the atrium, standing beneath the new mural. "You're going to take it, aren't you?" she asked. Leona looked up. "I already did, Woodis, but I'm not leaving." Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "I'm building a bridge," Leona said, "between the ones still silenced and the ones who just started to listen." She folded the letter, tucked it into her coat pocket, and headed into the staff hall. Another meeting was beginning, but this time, they didn't just notice her arrival. They waited for her to begin. The twist will redefine what redemption truly means. She wasn't supposed to be seen. Not by the cameras, not by the board, not by the ones who had laughed when her name was whispered only in corridors. But in silence, she listened. In shadows, she translated. And when no one gave her a place, she carved one with her own voice. You watched her fall, not because she failed, but because the system refused to rise with her. You watched her rise, not because she was rescued, but because she remembered what they tried to make her forget. That truth doesn't beg for a microphone. It becomes one. So now we ask you, if you witnessed injustice like this, would you speak up? Would you stand back, or would you, like Leona, hold your ground and rewrite the ending? Tell us below. Comment what moment made you pause. What lesson struck you the most? What part of her fight reminded you of your own? Because this isn't just her story. It's a pattern we're breaking, one script at a time. And if you believe stories like this should echo louder than cruelty, Clearer than silence, subscribe to Unveiled Wealth, where kindness sparks redemption, where silence breaks power, and where every unheard voice someday becomes the loudest one in the room. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that speaks where silence once ruled. Unveiled Wealth, new stories every week.